well, and it's the wrong size, it breaks, very annoying.
Pre-sealed, resealable bags. I can never get the blinking things open like you're supposed to, and I can never close them up again.
Good, two great ones. Tim says a top-ranking annoying plastic disposable razors. I gave them up years ago. Nothing beats a good shave with a good sharp cutthroat. Oh gosh, really?
Grow a beard.
And Doug says, I can relate to this one as well, as many can. Sarah's do inorganic soya sauce with a plastic top moulded over the glass bottle. It has to be cut off to recycle the bottle. And there's many times, Ellie Jones, when I thought, does that little plastic piece have to be there on the top of that soya sauce bottle?
Yes, but I'm more concerned if I can just go back to the plastic thingy which is now going to be recyclable cardboard on the bread bags. Are the bread bags still going to be plastic?
Yes, they are.
That's
as far as I
weird.
know.
That's a bit weird.
Yeah, but the bread tags will be cardboard. Hey, wonderful panel. Thank you
Merry
very much.
Christmas, everybody.
Yeah,
Merry
too.
Christmas,
You
everyone.
too.
All the best.
Thank you for joining me. I'm Wallace Chapman. Thank you so much again. Back tomorrow at 3:45. Till then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, exemplary and an excellent job. That's the verdict on the first 48 hours of the police response to the Christchurch terrorist attacks. But a new report still makes more than 75 recommendations for improvements. Calls for spy boss Rebecca Kitteridge to step down in the wake of yesterday's report on the mosque shootings. Claims of bullying, homophobia, racism and sexism at the South Island's largest port. Some of the survivors of the Whakaari eruption are reunited a year on. The way we're teaching maths in school doesn't add up, according to some. And how to reduce your Christmas carbon footprint without being a total Grinch.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata at the NA. A review into the police's response to the March 15 mosque attacks has called its response exemplary, but found it didn't have enough staff to deal with the number of inquiries from victims' families. The review assessed the police's actions in the first 48 hours and has made 76 recommendations. Rachel Graham has more.
The review said the police did an excellent job by any standards, though the debrief process has identified improvements which could help if such an event was to happen again. It says the family liaison and ethnic liaison officers were mobilised quickly, but there were not enough of them to respond to the huge volume and urgency of the requests for information. It says a more diverse and culturally competent New Zealand police workforce would have reduced pressure on those staff. This is Rachel Graham.
The Police Commissioner Andrew Costa joins Checkpoint after this bulletin. The Prime Minister says it's too soon to say whether any formal apology will be made to the families of those who lost their lives in the Whakaari disaster. There were 47 people on the island when it erupted a year ago, and 22 were killed or later died of their injuries. Most of them were international tourists. Jacinda Ardern says with a WorkSafe court case and a coroner's inquiry pending, it's too early to consider something like a formal apology.
For me, it would be just too premature to say before we have those questions answered. But I think everyone collectively in New Zealand feels deeply sorry that this happened to those who came to visit our land and to those who were acting as guides that day.
Jacinda Ardern. Public and private ceremonies have been held today to mark the first anniversary of the disaster. The sister of the Australian tourist shot dead in Raglan last year says her family is pleased with the sentence handed down to her brother's killer. Mark Garson killed 33-year-old Sean McKinnon while the tourist was in a camper van with his girlfriend. Garson will be in jail for at least 15 and a half years before he's eligible for parole. Speaking outside the High Court in Hamilton, Emmeline McKinnon said the family's happy with the sentence.
Nothing's going to bring Sean back. We're saddened by that, but at the same time too, we've been looking forward to it.
The Crown said the murder was an execution and described it as brutal, callous, depraved and cruel. An Otago University student was already in his graduation gown and cap today when he was told his ceremony was cancelled. Otago University postponed 2 graduations today after a threat was received. Neither police or the university are commenting on the nature of the threat, but say it was made electronically this week. Charles, who has a degree in commerce, says students were waiting in their full regalia to start the walk to the graduation site when they found out it was cancelled. He says it's very disappointing.
Extremely, I've taken a few days of unpaid leave off work just to come down, and I was really excited. But it's really unfortunate that we can't go ahead.
The university is awaiting further advice from the police before making any decisions about rescheduling today's disrupted graduation ceremonies. A 25-year-old man has been arrested in connection with a weekend shooting at an Auckland bar. A gun was fired more than once during the incident after a fight outside Dr. Rudy's rooftop bar early on Sunday morning. The man is due to appear in the Auckland District Court tomorrow on firearms charges. The occupants of a car have had a lucky escape after a slip came down on State Highway 3 near Uruti in Taranaki. Both lanes have been blocked by the slip, which happened at about 2:30 this afternoon. The car was caught in the slip, but the occupants were uninjured. Police are warning there are no detours available and motorists should hold off travel plans or expect delays. It's 4 minutes past 5. Canoe Racing New Zealand is fighting to reinstate the K1 200 canoe sprint event to the 2024 Olympic Games. The event, which New Zealand's Lisa Carrington is a 2-time Olympic champion in, won't be held at the Paris Games after the International Olympic Committee changed the list of events included. Canoe Racing New Zealand Chief Executive Tom Ashley says dropping the discipline will affect his organisation's funding, and they're working with 20 other international federations to overturn the decision.
Quick changes like this definitely have a really big impact on athletes, and so to do our job for them, it's really important that we try and hold the International Federation to account.
Canoe Racing New Zealand CEO Tom Ashley. A European Champions League football game has been called off after one of the match officials was accused of using a racial slur. The match between Paris Saint-Germain and Istanbul Başakşehir was suspended just a quarter of an hour into the game with the score at 0-0. Istanbul alleged the 4th official from Romania used a racist term towards their assistant coach. The Istanbul players walked from the field and were followed by the PSG players. The game will be completed tomorrow, but no matter, the PSG will qualify from the group along with German side Leipzig, who eliminated Manchester United with a 3-2 victory. Townsville will host National Rugby League's opening major event in 2021 with the Māori All-Stars playing the Indigenous All-Stars. The match will be played on February 20th. That's the news.
When the big stories break, we show up.
So before the ceremony even started, whānau were coming to the rocks and just looking towards the distance of Whakaari, reflecting, crying.
Out on the streets of Whakatane, Taylor Alufanoa says Whakatane will always remember the tragedy that has brought the close-knit community even closer.
It's been 12 months, but if I can just take you back to the days and hours after the eruption.
We're here. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, also Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Scattered showers turning to rain tonight, some heavy falls. Easing to showers tomorrow morning, then clearing by tomorrow night. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud at times, periods of rain tomorrow morning. Taranaki, Whanganui, Taihape, Manawatu and Wairarapa. Periods of rain, some heavy and thundery falls tomorrow morning, then clearing. Horowhenua to Wellington, Nelson, Buller and Marlborough. Rain or drizzle at times, clearing from tomorrow morning. Kaikoura Coast, mostly dry. Westland, fine today, showers developing tomorrow. Fiordland, showers turning to rain tomorrow evening with some heavy falls. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine but showers for Stewart Island today. Isolated showers developing in Southland and eastern Otago tomorrow, then rain in Southland at night. Chatham Islands, low cloud or fog at times, periods of rain tomorrow. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The police response in the first 48 hours following the Christchurch mosque attacks has been deemed excellent, but a new report still makes more than 75 recommendations for improvements. The release of the independent review follows the Royal Commission's report yesterday into the mass shootings that killed 51 people. Operation Deans, the official debrief of the police response, applauds the exemplary leadership shown by Canterbury and Police National Headquarters, pointing to the arrest of the murderer within 20 minutes of the first shots being fired. The country's top cop at the time, Mike Bush, gave a statement on the attacks at 5:29 p.m. on March 15th.
We are currently dealing with an unprecedented situation in New Zealand. It's very grave, it's very serious. We have dealt with an active shooter situation. We have multiple fatalities. At this point, I can't say how many, but it is significant. They occurred in two locations, two mosques in Christchurch, one at Deans Avenue and one at Linwood Avenue. Our police have those locations locked down. We have 4 people in custody. We are pouring resources into that area. Every available Canterbury and staff member and people nearby, other emergency services also, saturating that area with visibility to ensure that everyone who needs to get home can get so safely. As you can imagine, this is requiring every police and emergency resource that we have available. We have Defence Force aircraft here in Wellington ready to fly more resources into the area. We'll do that from other locations nearby as well. So I want to assure the public we are doing everything we can to make sure there is no more harm to their communities.
And that was Mike Bush, the police commissioner at the time, speaking on the day of the shootings. Today's report also highlights areas that need work. There weren't enough family liaison officers to help after the shootings. The 111 system doesn't routinely accept texts, which is critical for victims who are in hiding. Poor communication around victim identification and the release of bodies to whānau escalated tensions. There were delays recognising police staff were traumatised after seeing the live video feed of the mass killings. And local police commanders were unaware of an advanced sniper training exercise in Christchurch on the day of the attacks. And some specialised staff involved in that were armed and deployed themselves to the incident, but were not carrying recognisable ID. Well, joining me now is Police Commissioner Andy Costa. Commissioner, how much of the success and the speed of containment with this event was down to good luck in having that training exercise in the city at the time?
Look, I'm incredibly proud of the response and the bravery of our people in what was a horrific event for our country. There were things that went in our favour on the day, but the rounded view of this report is that the response was outstanding and that was down to good management in the round.
So you had, specialist officers on a training course, some of them from overseas, some of them were armed, they deployed themselves to the incident, they didn't have ID. What was the danger there?
Look, obviously this was a very fast unfolding situation and a huge number of calls received about what was happening. So early on, difficult for people to get a clear picture. We had these officers available to deploy and obviously they did what anyone would do in that situation, which is try to make a difference. Clearly, officers not identified creates the potential for confusion, and there was some confusion. Fortunately, in this case, there was no bad outcome from that.
But potentially someone could have been shot or injured, couldn't they? Because the public were told there were potentially multiple shooters. You had people who were armed, they weren't uniformed, and they weren't clearly identifiable. And I know they were doing their best, but that created, a serious potential risk there, didn't it?
Look, there was certainly potential for confusion, and our people are well trained to deal with situations. They don't fire randomly on people. They make good judgments. That's what happened in this case, and nothing untoward occurred. Obviously, we need to make sure that people who are deploying are well identified in connection with police, and that was a key learning from this situation.
Or even just tell commanders in the city that there is a big exercise like this underway in their town jurisdiction.
Yeah, look, absolutely, that was a key learning and one that's been well noted.
There is a recommendation for better access to tactical and response equipment. What gear are we talking about here?
We had a large number of staff able to deploy and provide response on the ground, and what we found is that access to firearms and other tactical equipment that they would normally take in that situation, we were at full capacity. That was partly a reflection of having a large number of people ready and available to respond. There was no suggestion here that had our normal number of people been available, we would have had an issue. But we are looking at whether we need to increase the availability of tactical equipment, including things like ballistic armour and so on.
And more guns?
Well, I would be surprised if more firearms were required. We have done a scan subsequent to March the 15th and assessed that by and large the equipment around the districts is acceptable level.
There was some confusion with 111 calls coming in with outdated information and it making it difficult to know what was happening right at that point in time. Would a drone have helped you with that?
Certainly having air support as we do in Auckland, which is in the form of a police helicopter, makes a big difference to being able to understand what's happening on the ground. Practically providing that kind of support across the whole country is a challenge. It's a very expensive resource. These situations. But
does Christchurch need that full-time helicopter for police?
We did trial a full-time helicopter in Christchurch, and clearly that makes a really big difference where it's available. Putting that kind of service across every city in New Zealand would be a huge cost. So, we need to think about that and whether there's a justification to explore options, but we recognise there are a range of challenges as well. Do
you believe there is a justification for a city like Christchurch to have a full-time police helicopter?
We haven't at this point reached that view. If we were to put something like that in Christchurch, we would need to think about Wellington and Tauranga and no doubt other places. Like anything, we have to weigh up the cost over the benefit.
What are you going to do to enable routine texting to the 111 line? Because victims who don't want to make a noise, if they're hiding, they can't make voice calls. When will you address that?
Yeah, look, that's a really important opportunity identified in this review, and we are actively exploring what it would look like to provide a text service. Clearly there are a range of complexities with that, including the ability to validate that information being texted to us is genuine and being able to ask the kind of questions of clarification that would be helpful. But we are exploring it. The overseas experiences on this front will be informative, and it's...
So what's the timeline for deciding?
Look, I don't have a timeline for that at this stage. It's part of a broader set of service delivery improvements that we need to think about, but it's definitely an area of interest for these rare but desperate situations that can occur.
There was a lot of anger and upset at the time around the release of bodies and confusion over victim identification, misinformation. I mean, what is the single biggest improvement that you could make there?
This was a huge event, and it's hard to explain the chaos at the scene, which needed to be carefully managed, not just to ensure correct victim identification, but to ensure that we preserved evidence for the criminal prosecution. So it doesn't get much more complicated than this for disaster victim identification. There are a bunch of recommendations there that we will work through. The key one, I think, is making sure that we right-size the approach to victim identification according to the circumstances and engaging early with the coroner to make sure that we're on the same page about what's necessary in the situation.
And having enough fully trained family liaison officers to communicate information presumably would have helped too. You asked for 40, but only had 9 available.
Yeah, look, that was absolutely a gap there, and with the added complexity in this case of different cultural expectations around these processes. Our people did an outstanding job in those circumstances, but we recognise that we've actually got some work to do in that area, which is well underway.
So in terms of cultural awareness, I mean, how many of your senior officers would be from the Muslim community?
We have fairly limited representation at our senior levels in terms of ethnic communities, and that's something that we're absolutely focused on.
So are you going to have a quota?
Look, I think quota is probably not the right language here. We need to make sure that to the best extent possible, our leadership is representative of the communities that we police. We have moved massively in recent years on this, but we have work to do to ensure that people from a range of diverse backgrounds are able to progress through the ranks and provide that kind of leadership.
Also identified that perhaps you underestimated the trauma that would be and was experienced by your own people from the live stream of the killings. I mean, how many people or how many claims for mental distress or sick leave have there been related to this?
I don't have that number in front of me, but it was incredibly...
Are you tracking that information though, Commissioner?
Yes, look, we had a very substantial welfare work stream sitting right across this operation. In fact, it was one of the strong points of what we did, but it was incredibly distressing for our people to see the live stream, understandably. Some needed to as an essential part of their roles. Others, there was opportunity maybe to protect them from it, and that's a key learning. We did, though, stand up a huge amount of support, and we do have the data about how many people received counselling and the like, and it was a large number.
And are some of your staff still getting help in that area?
I'm sure that there are some who are still grappling with the effects of this. What people discuss with counsellors is obviously kept fairly confidential, but we are still supporting a range of people, in connection with this event.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That's the Police Commissioner there, Andrew Costa. It is almost 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that one. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. More than 75 recommendations there. One is to look at the 111 system that doesn't routinely accept texts, which creates a problem for victims who can't talk on the phone at the time of a crisis. Let us know your thoughts. The man who shot dead an Australian tourist near Raglan last year has been sentenced to life with a non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months. 33-year-old Sean McKinnon was shot twice at close range in the camper van he and his girlfriend were in. The Crown has called Mark Garson a brutal killer who's inflicted terrible grief on his fiancée and family. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been at the sentencing in the High Court in Hamilton.
Sean McKinnon and his fiancée Bianca Buckley were asleep in the van at an isolated location near the beachside town when Garson banged on the door demanding the keys to the van. While Mr McKinnon was looking for them, Garson fired a shot into the van, hitting him in the abdomen, and not long after fired again, hitting him in the head. Crown Prosecutor Jacinda Hamilton describes the offending as the most serious of its kind.
That this offending is properly characterised as an inexplicably explosive violent episode during which the defendant repeatedly shot an unarmed man at close range and without warning in what was an entirely unprovoked attack.
She described the attack as an execution killing.
This was particularly brutal. There was a high level of callousness. It can probably be regarded as depraved, and there was real cruelty in the way that the defendant acted, first toward Mr McKinnon and then toward his fiancée.
After killing Mr McKinnon, Garson then threatened Ms Buckley. He pointed his gun at her, ordering her to find the keys to the van. She managed to escape, and Garson drove off with Mr McKinnon's body inside the van. In her victim impact statement, she said she was denied a chance to say a final farewell to Sean and watched his life leave him. Two of Mr McKinnon's sisters travelled from Australia to give victim impact statements, and other family members watched proceedings via video link. Emmeline McKinnon described her younger brother as a beautiful person and someone who would do anything to help people. She said the family's grief will never end.
And so my brother is gone, and where he was has become silent, and I hear this silence every day. I would know immediately if he was to step back into this world, but I know that he won't because he has gone and he has died, and we buried him. Sean meant everything to those that loved him, and yet his death was meaningless.
Another sister, Mary McKinnon, describes her brother as a happy and very cool guy.
It is not possible to write the beauty of Sean in a few words or convey the gravity of the loss. It is only having known him and having loved him and having been loved by him that you can really understand what was done. His presence made my heart feel full and smiling. His absence is ever present, it's aching and it's unsolvable. Since Sean has been gone, it feels like someone has blown out the sun.
Defence lawyer Charles Bean describes the killing as an utterly senseless act, but the Garson was on a methamphetamine binge and was intending to kill himself that night.
It's trite to say society in New Zealand awash with mental illness. We have our own epidemic of methamphetamine addiction, and it's that very addiction that placed Mark Garson on a fateful journey to a senseless act.
He says Garson started on cannabis at the age of 12 and meth at 15.
We know that he was on a binge of methamphetamine use. We know he was suffering from depression. We know now from the probation reports he has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And we know he'd made an arrangement with his friend to kill him that eve.
Justice Gorton described a number of aggravating factors in his offending.
Your actions were determined, but they were impulsive, not planned or premeditated. You had a firearm for a very different purpose, and when you were left by your friend, you acted in the way I have described.
Speaking outside court, Emmeline McKinnon said the family's happy with the sentence handed down.
It's a funny day because nothing's going to bring Sean back. We're saddened by that, but at the same time too, we've been looking forward to it. The Waikatos CIB that are standing here beside us, they've done a phenomenal job. I don't even know the amount of hours and hard work that they've put in.
Justice Gordon allowed Garson a reduction of 18 months on his non-parole sentence for pleading guilty and to take into account personal circumstances. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Core Andrew McRae-Tene.
This time last year, the coastal town of Whakatane was responding to a natural disaster. 50 kilometres off the coast, New Zealand's most active volcano, Whakaari, had erupted, spilling ash, noxious gases and acidic sludge. There were 47 people on the island, 22 of them died. Others were seriously injured. Today, they were remembered at services in Whakatane, from where Charlotte Cook reports.
As morning broke on the first anniversary of the Whakaari eruption, about 100 mourners gathered at dawn to remember the victims. Quiet, except for the hum of crashing waves. Ngāti Awa Kaumātua led an emotional waiata in Karakia. Those gathered faced out towards the ocean, as if to address the volcano itself. People in the crowd hug and comfort each other. Among them, Kelsey Waghorn and Jake Milbank, the two tour guides who were terribly burnt in the eruption but lived to tell the tale. The body of their colleague, Hayden Marshall Inman, has never been found. Many of the community are still reeling his loss. Mick Gooden, a friend of the family, says when he sees the photo of Hayden hanging in the fishing club, it's painful.
Like as you walk through the club here, there's a photo of Hayden in this club rooms here now, and you see that, you get a bit emotional. Yeah, pretty raw time, eh?
Mick Gooden took Hayden's father out fishing when the rahui was lifted. He says Hayden put a huge fish on the end of the rod for his father.
I took Hayden's dad out the first opportunity we could, and he actually got a tuna for himself, the first one he's ever caught, so that was 57 kilos. So, that was a pretty emotional time. The next, was on the 1st of January, so yeah, that's about the only bright spot of goodness that came out of all this.
He says it was the biggest tuna catch of the year. Hayden's mother, Avie Woods, says everyone now knows who Hayden is. She wanted to talk about her own grief.
What do you say when you lose a son and you break down on the beach, calling out his name, sobbing, and a stranger comes up behind you, puts their arms around you, whilst you cry You wail, you sob, call out his name. That was a day just after Hayden had died. To this day, I do not know who that lady was on the beach.
She says she's privileged to be close to him. At the beach, they can feel connected. Hayden's brother, Mark Inman, says if he was still here, he'd tell him they're doing the good he used to.
I guess I'd just say that we're here, you know, trying to do the good that he used to do. So, yeah, that we're here for you and we still love you.
What do you think he'd say to you?
Oh, he'd probably say, cheer, bro.
Mark Inman says he feels lucky he can be so close to his brother. Others are not so lucky. At Mātātua Wharanui, officials and families gathered. The whānau of Tipini Mangi, the other guide killed in the eruption, were there wearing T-shirts to remember him. Overseas victims and their families shared stories through letters and videos.
1 year ago today, our lives and the lives of 45 others changed forever. Our deepest condolences go out to all of the others on the island that fateful day and their families who have suffered from this horrible tragedy.
From the shadow of that eruption, we have met so many kind and wonderful people and would like to thank them for all they have done to help us survive.
Our road has been long and bumpy, and we're not to the end of our journey yet. But people often ask us how we're feeling, and we tell them, we're not great, but we're grateful. To our tour guides on the day, Kelsey and Jake, your quick thinking and your decisiveness gave us a chance for survival.
I still remember the feeling of my heart sinking into my stomach when I saw Mum's name pop up on my phone. I remember the tears in my eyes when she told me a volcano had erupted and that you weren't accounted for. I will never forget the last time I heard your voice over the phone when you told me you were okay. The relief I felt, the comfort your voice gave me.
The rest of the community was across the road looking out to sea where Whakaari is hidden by clouds. Locals and visitors say it's about remembering and honouring those whose lives are permanently changed. At the Whakatane heads, first responders came together, throwing reeds into the ocean. For many, the 1 year mark is just the beginning. Today, New Zealand has been reminded time heals, but that healing takes time. In Whakatane, for Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
And if you are listening to Charlotte's piece, we'll put it on our Facebook page so you can see the video, which was filmed by Dom Thomas. Otago University has postponed 2 graduation ceremonies planned for today after receiving a security threat. They've told those planning to travel for further ceremonies on Saturday and next week to stay put until more is known. Details are scarce, but as Timothy Brown reports, police are taking it seriously.
It's not too late to come forward and to do the right thing, and I encourage the person or the persons behind the threats to do that. Reach out to us. It's not too late to do the right thing.
That's the message from the head of Southern District Police, Superintendent Paul Basham, to whoever's responsible for the threat. The police and the university are staying tight-lipped about the nature of the threat, but have confirmed it was received electronically earlier this week. Students were assembled in Great King Street ahead of their graduation procession. When news went around, it wasn't safe to go ahead. Mr Basham says a large team of investigators are looking into the origin and credibility of the threat.
This is a big decision that has a deep impact on them, and it's a decision that we haven't taken lightly. So we are taking the threat very seriously. I have a large team working on it as we speak, and we're confident that we will make progress over the next 24 to 36 hours.
He hopes to resolve the matter quickly, so advice can be given about whether other planned ceremonies should go ahead.
We understand that the university is the city and the city is the university, and we want to do everything we can to get back to normal as quickly as we can.
The university's Vice-Chancellor, Professor Harleen Hain, says they'll take their cues from the police.
Right now we're waiting to act on the recommendation of the police. We haven't cancelled the ceremonies at this stage, and we will be in constant communication with Paul and his team. Hopefully we will be able to hold our graduation ceremonies on Saturday, but we will keep everybody informed as soon as we know.
Professor Hain advised those travelling to the city for Saturday and next week's graduations to sit tight for now. Mr Basham says the safety and security of students and their loved ones is their priority.
The number one concern that we have is for people's safety. I want to qualify that a little bit and provide everybody with a degree of reassurance that the threat is at this stage specific to the graduation ceremonies. Now, while we need to take that with a grain of salt, there's nothing to suggest that the threat is any wider than that at the moment.
The ceremonies were to be held in the Dunedin Town Hall, which adjoins the council chambers and civic centre. Dunedin Mayor Aaron Hawkins says the council has no reason to believe it's unsafe for its buildings to remain open at present. Nonetheless, he says the threat is unsettling and traumatic for the community.
The news of a security threat against today's graduation events is disturbing, and it's obviously disappointing for graduates and their families on this a very special occasion, but it is pleasing to see police and the university have acted swiftly to make their safety the number one priority.
Andy Randall's one of the 553 graduands meant to be celebrating the end of their studies today. He says bemused shock went through the crowd gathered for the procession when news of the threat emerged.
When I told my mum, she started laughing, thinking, oh, this is a joke, but we don't know if it is or not. And, you know, if it is a joke, it's a really cruel joke. If it's not a joke, it's a serious problem, and, you know, we're best to stay away. But, no, I don't think many people knew how to take it, and probably nervous laughter was the most common response.
He understands the decision to postpone, but is still disappointed.
There's so many of us that, you know, after years of work, this is really the day where we get to, you know, just be selfish for a couple of hours, you know, play dress up and, you know, get capped, receive our degrees, and not getting to take part in these long-standing traditions is quite disappointing.
Fellow graduate Richard Marks also supports the decision.
A lot of the friends around me all pulled out their phones at the same time. We kind of just, all of our expressions sunk. It wasn't a very good feeling, but I am glad that they did postpone it instead of going ahead and possibly taking the risk.
Christiana Schmid travelled from Whakaari to see her son graduate.
I've just started in a new job as well, and I couldn't just have leave just 2 weeks after starting, and so I had to jiggle quite a bit around. But it's one of those things, really. There's nothing we can do about it. It's no good being upset. There's nothing you can do about it.
She still intends to celebrate the day by taking her son and his friends out to dinner. With Otago Polytechnic's graduation ceremony planned for Friday, the pressure is now on to uncover the source of the threat. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Now, we've just had a message from Otago Polytechnic, which says it's considering whether to go ahead with graduation ceremonies scheduled for Friday. The Polytechnic's Chief Executive, Dr. Megan Gibbons, says the safety of students and staff is its number one priority. It plans to make an announcement tomorrow morning following a police update. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Speaker's silent on how much it's costing taxpayers to defend him against defamation proceedings. Does the way we teach maths in schools add up? And calls for the capital to get a large multi-purpose arena for gigs. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
The police's review into its handling of the March 15th terror attacks has praised its response, but says staff were swamped by inquiries from family members of those killed and injured. The review by an independent panel found the police response on the day was in the main exemplary, but it says there were not enough staff to respond to the volume and urgency of requests for information. Police Commissioner Andy Costa has told Checkpoint overall he is incredibly proud of the response of police. The killer of Australian tourist Sean McKinnon near Raglan last year will be in prison for at least 15 and a half years before he's eligible for parole. 24-year-old Mark Garson was sentenced today after pleading guilty to shooting Mr McKinnon, who was in a camper van with his girlfriend. The Crown told the High Court in Hamilton today the murder was an execution. Dunedin's Mayor Aaron Hawkins says the threat against today's planned Otago University graduation ceremonies is disturbing. Police are working to determine the origin and credibility of the electronic threat, which caused today's ceremonies to be postponed. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's too soon to say whether any formal apology will be made to the families of those who lost their lives in the Whakaari disaster. 22 people who were on the island at the time died on the day or later from their injuries, and ceremonies have been held today to mark the first anniversary of the disaster. New Zealanders are making more than 1,000 online attempts every day to access child pornography. The figure's been revealed by a customs officer, Simon Peterson, who says the problem is more serious than what people would expect. His comments came at today's sentencing of a Northland man, 34-year-old Brent Riddell, to more than 15 years in prison on dozens of child sex charges. The Commerce Commission has begun an investigation into the $100,000 cash drop by the Safety Warehouse last weekend. The event was marketed as New Zealand's largest mass cash drop. However, attendees found they were picking up mainly vouchers resembling $5 notes. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for the business news now with Nicholas Poynton, who's joined me in the studio. Nicholas, been talk about this all day. Infratel, so big investors in Infratel are starting to choose their sides in what could be a hostile takeover.
Yeah, this was absolutely the big business news of the day, and all kicked off last night really when Australia's largest superannuation fund, that's Australian Super, they went public with its audacious bid to take over full ownership of Infratel for about $5 billion. And for those who don't know, Infratel is a company that invests primarily in utilities and infrastructure assets. It has major shareholdings in the likes of Trustpower, owns a large stake in Vodafone, Wellington International Airport, the renewable power company Tilt Renewables, and it was started in 1994 by Lloyd Morrison, and he's a New Zealander, and it's always had this ethos as the little Kiwi company that could, and by most accounts it has. It truly is one of the big dogs on the NZX. This is a top 10 stock, which is why it was such a surprise when we got this news last night. So before markets opened today, Infratel came out and flatly rejected the offer. They say the deal, which would pay a 22% premium on yesterday's closing share price, was just not enough. It also didn't reflect the value that came from Infratel's controlling position in Trustpower, and the CEO said he didn't even need to talk to the Australian Superannuation Fund about the deal. They also revealed that the Australian Super Fund had made 2 prior offers that Infratel's board had just also shot down. Hence why this fund is maybe deciding to go public, trying to sort of drag Infratel to the table, maybe force their hand. So we spent a lot of today speaking to the company's big institutional shareholders about how they felt. And ACC, they own a 7% stake in this company, and they say Infratel's board, they need to pump the brakes and seriously consider this offer, get to the table. However, Fisher Funds, this is a fund that controls about 5% of Infratel's stock, they say, nah, the deal's not enough. They support Infratel. So this leaves us in a really, really interesting situation, because depending on how the Australian Super Fund is feeling, whether it's, in the mood to really flex its muscles, and if Infratel continues to reject these offers, we could begin to see a situation where, the fund may go out and try and recruit those big institutional investors like the likes of ACC, get them on their side and force Infratel to come to the table and begin negotiating. And it could be like MetLife Care all over again, that whole debacle that we've talked about endlessly throughout this year.
Yeah, dragged on and on.
One of the things that happened there was that the New Zealand Super Fund, they had a 30% controlling stake in the company. They went behind the back of the company's board to back a deal from the overseas investor for a deal that many on the board, or some on the board, felt was actually too low. It wasn't a fair value. So look, this is a story that will not go away. It's only going to become more interesting, and if it were to go ahead, this could be the biggest takeover in New Zealand corporate history. And look, one thing I haven't even mentioned is what this would mean for the NZX to lose an absolute blue chip stock. I spoke to Mark Peterson today. He was thoroughly tight-lipped, didn't want to give anything away, but I'm sure they don't want to lose this company.
In other apparently exciting news, because I received a message from you, Nicholas, in all caps, including an exclamation mark, another listing on the NZX. Yeah,
this took me by surprise. So on Monday, I was talking about Radius Care. Well, in the last 24 hours, the NZX gave us up a call and were asking asking us if we were going to be coming to the other listing this week. We had no idea what this was, and it turns out an Australian listed company on Friday, they put out an announcement that they were planning to change its name to Auckland Real Estate Trust from Quattro Plus Real Estate, and it was going to dual list here on the NZX. And this is a company that specialises in buying older office type buildings, refurbishes them into boutique styled co-working spaces that really cater to small to medium-sized business. This sort of co-working spaces, it's sort of a new phenomenon that's really kicking off in major cities.
It's like a flat share for business.
Yeah. There you go. You couldn't put it any better. So now Auckland Real Estate, they have 7 properties in Auckland. They have a handful around the viaduct. They've got 1 overseas in the United States. Now they plan to divest that and become 100% focused on New Zealand, on the Auckland commercial property market. They say this plan to dual list, it's all about opening up another capital market. So when they do want to raise money, there's another pool of investors they can call upon to fund future growth. And they do plan to do a capital raise next year, and they are already on the hunt for more properties to add to its portfolio, in particular the older heritage type buildings that they can pick up, turn around, and to use a piece of their jargon, they say reposition in the market. So look, today was a surprise listing. I was the only media person there. It sort of may have slipped under everyone else's radar. But tomorrow we will have Radius Care, and next week there will be New Zealand Rural Land Company. So we're now looking at 5 listings for the year.
What was the bit of jargon again? What was the word?
Reposition.
Reposition, yeah.
Reposition in the market.
Increasingly we're hearing those kinds of words. Text us with what is your most annoying piece of jargon.
Pivot.
Learnings is one of them. Text us on 2101 and tell us what they are. You've got some numbers for us there too, Nicholas.
So on the back of that Infratil announcement, its share price rose by 19% today. So if people check their KiwiSavers today, they're probably looking pretty good. And that alone helped drag up the whole NZX by 170 points to a record close of 12,889. And our dollar, it's at 70.6 US cents, 94.9 Australian and 52.7 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with business there. An independent review into workplace culture at the South Island's largest port has found numerous accounts of bullying, homophobia, racism and sexism. Findings into the culture at Lyttelton Port showed that staff were in fear of speaking out. Offensive behaviour was normalised and that the port lacks diversity. The executive summary of the review was released to the public this morning, but the port is refusing to release the full review, saying it contains confidential employment matters. The port says it is accepting all 32 recommendations made by Maria Dew, QC, who authored the review. Anand Zaki reports from Christchurch.
The review into Lyttelton Port's workplace culture paints a damning picture. Nearly 100 workers, past and present, took part in the process. 81% of people said there was bullying, 42% of women said there was sexism, and 90% of the non-European interviewees said racism was an issue. Lyttelton Port's Chief Executive, Roger Gray, says it is a sobering read and is promising action.
Specifically, yes, I've read the report. Independent review has shone a light on the organisation. It's given us a mirror to look at. There's a lot of really hard-working people here at LPC who do a great job keeping the supplies going for Canterbury each way. There are pockets of behaviour at all levels that are unacceptable.
Mr Gray joined the company in February and commissioned the review in May. He says he and the board will take some time to digest the review before outlining an action plan in the new year.
What we'll do is, as our action plan in the new year, is look at each of the respective recommendations and start to address them. If, as we move forward, specific incidents are identified or specific allegations are put forward by staff members, then they'll be investigated independently and we'll take the appropriate action once that independent investigation is concluded.
During the interview process, people were directly quoted discussing bullying and sexism at the port. Their comments have been voiced.
It's pretty regular that female cargo handlers' slightly higher-pitched voices are mocked over the radio publicly. My manager told me I will have a target on my back. This made me feel terrible as a new recruit. There was an assumption that this just had to be accepted.
The review also interviewed people who made racist comments but didn't seem to understand their comments were racist.
Bloody Maori, black bastard,
"What's up, Blackie? Sooty," they're said in a friendly or joking way. It's just banter.
Lindsay Chappell, Assistant Secretary at the Amalgamated Workers Union Christchurch, says there has to be accountability.
If this behaviour continues on and it's proven, heads have to roll. Heads have to roll. It can't be condoned at any level. If union members are not performing correctly when it comes to that type of stuff, their heads roll. So no different for the top seat.
The Rail and Maritime Transport Union South Island organiser John Kerr is welcoming the port's moves to address the issues.
We broadly support the initiative that management is taking to address the concerns. But obviously, it is going to require some pretty thorough investigation, and we'd expect that any formal complaints would be addressed through due process.
A review into the workplace experiences of port staffer Katrina Hay, who died in 2019 after a suspected suicide, has also been completed. The report found that although there were 2 incidents of unreasonable behaviour towards her, there was no evidence of serious and sustained bullying. Hay's daughter Cassandra declined an interview request, but said in a statement her mother had been downplayed by the report and that it was hurtful. However, the port says the review into Hay's experiences showed improvements needed to be made supporting staff mental health and well-being. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Anan Zaki.
The head of the SIS is facing calls to stand down from the role, with the Greens saying she's unfit to lead the agency. Some in the Muslim community too have little faith in Rebecca Kitteridge. They say there's been a lack of accountability in the wake of yesterday's Royal Commission report into the March 15 terror attack. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The Royal Commission report arrived on a wave of remorse.
On behalf of the government, I apologise.
My apology is genuine today.
We unreservedly apologise.
But that contrition came with few consequences. The report concludes there was no plausible way authorities could have uncovered the attack, except by chance. A tough pill to swallow for Anjum Rahman of the Islamic Women's Council.
They did find all these faults in the system, so it's really hard to understand why they would say that there is no possible way they could have detected him.
The report is critical of the spy agencies. It identifies an inappropriate focus on Islamic terrorism, while the extreme right-wing threat went ignored. Anjum Rahman says it's difficult to believe there will be change while the same people remain at the top, namely the SIS boss Rebecca Kitteridge.
I know she has apologised for that, but the thing is, what is going to be different now?
Ms Kitteridge has apologised for her agency's interactions with Muslims, the anxiety caused, but she insists the Islamic community has never been monitored as a whole. The Greens' Golriz Garman says it's not good enough.
After we've had our highest level inquiry into this, there's been a damning finding of prejudice against her agency, and she is denying that finding, which does make her, in my opinion, unfit to lead the change that the Commission has recommended. We can't keep relitigating this.
It's not a view shared by Andrew Little, the minister responsible for the spy agencies and for the response to the March 15 attack. He says he has full confidence in the Director General of Security.
Rebecca Kitteridge came into the SIS role as Director to make culture change and organisational improvement, and she's done a very good job in doing that.
The Commission's report notes the spy agencies were constrained by a lack of resources. It says in 2014 they were in a fragile state. Dr. Chris Wilson from the University of Auckland is an expert on terrorism and political conflict, and he agrees.
They were severely underfunded and under-resourced. Yes, there is some responsibility within the security agencies, but there's also perhaps even more culpability on the part of successive governments.
National was in charge for a long stretch of that time, but Judith Collins defends her party's record. She says ministers struggled to win political and public consensus to beef up search and surveillance legislation in the wake of the Urewera raids.
If you're looking at for any particular party to blame, have a look at the people who are busily marching the streets, the MPs, the parties who were doing that at a time when National was trying to do the right thing for the country.
The government, the security agencies, the police, the opposition. And so the blame shifting continues. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
New Zealand's bad results in an international maths and science test are being blamed on ability grouping in classrooms and the previous government's national standards in reading, writing and maths. Scores for Kiwi 9 and 13-year-olds fell in the study, with the 13-year-olds recording their worst results ever. Maths and science specialists say it's worrying, and the government says there is a trend of long-term decline. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
Okay, so that's 16 divided by 3. Okay, that doesn't work either.
All New Zealand children learn maths and science, but a test of more than 500,000 children in 64 countries shows they're not very good at it. Their average scores in the TIMS assessment, which runs every 5 years, are lower than those of children in Australia, Canada and England, and well behind the leading nations like Singapore. Chris Duggan from the Science Education Centre, House of Science, says that's a problem.
We are seeing a trend, and I think it's a worrying trend, where over many years now, New Zealand is getting further behind other OECD countries in maths and science achievement for these age groups, and I think something needs to change, because if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting the same results.
She says schools often prioritise reading and maths, and science has been a poor cousin for too long.
Often science just doesn't get done to the quality that it needs to be, even though it is a core curriculum area. It is inherently expensive and difficult to resource, and the confidence of the teachers is often not there, so it does slip through the system. The Education Review Office reported a few years back that only 27% of our primary schools are delivering an effective science program, which is shocking, and it looks like things haven't improved an awful lot.
But New Zealand's maths scores are even worse than its science scores. Massey University maths teaching specialist Associate Professor Jodie Hunter says New Zealand needs to spend more money showing primary school teachers how to teach maths well. She says in this country the testing was done in 2018 and 2019, providing clear evidence the national standards in reading, writing and maths, which were dropped in 2018, did not work because they were too narrow.
Unfortunately, what happened is in some ways it was too specific, because what happened was people taught to the standards which were not necessarily seen across mathematics and seen as kind of less comprehensive, I suppose, than what I think something like TIMS looks at.
She says the other culprit is teaching children in groups according to their ability, something New Zealand does a lot more than other countries.
That has an ongoing kind of snowball effect and impact in terms of their achievement. Because as soon as we start labelling children as low ability in mathematics, then we start teaching them differently, I think, than those who are labelled as high ability.
Perry Rush from the Principals Federation says the results are disappointing but not surprising. He says a big problem is there is no longer a national school advisory service that ensures teachers know the best ways to teach maths and science.
It's not acceptable for there to be individual schools applying different ways of approaching teaching and learning in the absence of any national coordinated professional leadership around the appropriate approaches that will make the difference. That's missing, and it's important we have that.
The government says New Zealand is seeing long-term decline in reading, maths and science across most international studies, and there's also a persistent equity problem. It says it will bring evidence-based system-wide change. It's not yet clear what that will be or whether it will make a difference before the next round of TIMS testing in 4 years' time. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
It's 5 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Trees, fairy lights, wrapping paper, massive meals. Christmas is a time of excess and it hits the environment hard. So can we reduce our carbon footprint without becoming the Grinch? Louise Tanuth takes a look at the environmental impact of the festive season.
'Tis the season to be jolly, but at what cost to the environment? Most of us will already have a Christmas tree or be thinking about it soon, but which option has a lower carbon footprint, real or fake? A fresh pine clocks up to 20 kgs of carbon dioxide, assuming you get a fresh one each year, but their plastic friend is even worse at 30 kgs a year. Sarah McLaren, who's a professor in life cycle management at Massey University, says it's all about how often you replace the tree.
As long as you keep your fake tree for at least 5 years, you're better off getting the fake tree rather than the real tree.
And if you've got a real tree, once you've unwrapped the presents and stowed away the ornaments, it quickly turns into waste. General Manager at Toitu Envirocare, Belinda Mathews, says it's vital to avoid them ending up in landfill.
They're great because they do absorb carbon dioxide while they're growing, but if you dispose of them in the wrong way, they actually emit more greenhouse gases when they are breaking down in the landfill than they actually absorb in carbon dioxide as they grow, which seems a bit counterintuitive.
Burning is also a no, as this releases the tree's carbon back into the atmosphere as CO2 right away. So chop it up and compost it, otherwise put it in a green waste bag or bin, or ask your tree supplier if they'll take it back. Belinda boycotts both.
I'm a bit of a woodworker, so I've got some bits of offcuts of wood and string and Christmas decorations that I've put together and made something that we hang up each year that's a little bit different but still looks like a Christmas tree.
It wouldn't be Christmas without lights twinkling inside and out. New Zealand's carbon footprint is already smaller in this department, as 80% of electricity is generated from renewable sources. But according to Sarah McLaren, there are still greener options to light things up.
So using LEDs can be a good option. Candles, particularly there's the recent thing of using natural oil-based candles as opposed to candles which are made from essentially a fossil fuel, petroleum.
It's estimated we throw away 26,000 kilometres of Christmas wrapping paper in New Zealand each year. That's enough to stretch from Auckland to London and halfway back again. CEO of conservation charity Project Crimson, Adele Fitzpatrick, says it's time to put down the wrapping paper.
Use fabric. Find some beautiful fabric and use that, and that can be reused. Paper, and especially the shiny stuff and all the sellotape, and it all gets thrown into the recycling bin or the rubbish bin. It's such a terrible waste.
Whether it's Christmas dinner or lunch, for most of us it's a big meal. Researchers have calculated a standard Christmas dinner for 8 generates about 20 kgs of carbon. Adele Fitzpatrick says the key to slashing that figure is sourcing food close to home.
Grow your own. Nothing tastes better than potatoes you've grown all by yourself. Things that are, locally sourced.
If you can't part with your cranberry sauce from the US, one large tree absorbs the same amount of carbon every year. So planting a tree will offset your meal not just for the year, but for the life of the tree. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Louise Tanuth aho.
Well, a lot of feedback from you after Nicholas Poynton during Business Chat called out jargon. You've got in touch with some of the things that you loathe. People leaders, this listener says, leaders is bad enough. Pivot, the most annoying word in the world, says Ant. Lean in is another one. Going forward is and always will be the worst gobbledygook corporate speak ever, ! Says Paul. Park it. Circle round. Robust, Carl says, when used by politicians, it means childish, as in it was a robust debate. All my potential learnings are incredibly compromised going forward, this person says. So in summary, going forward, let's pivot, maybe circle around, lean into some learnings, because we're on a journey. There is a step change coming. It's Susanna with the news.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The Police Commissioner admits confusion was caused when unidentified armed people responded to the Christchurch mosque attacks. A review of the police response that day says members of the police, the New Zealand Defence Force and overseas staff were at a sniper training course in Christchurch. He says they deployed themselves to the incident and some non-New Zealand police staff carried weapons for their own protection. Police Commissioner Andrew Costa told Checkpoint it was a fast unfolding situation and the people who responded provided valuable first aid.
There was certainly potential for confusion, and our people are well trained to deal with situations. They don't fire randomly on people. They make good judgments. That's what happened in this case, and nothing untoward occurred.
Police Commissioner Andrew Costa. Overall, the review found the police response to the attacks was exemplary, but improvements could be made to processes and systems for future responses. As his family and ethnic liaison officers were mobilised quickly, but there were not enough of them to respond to the volume and urgency of the requests for information. The Commerce Commission has launched an investigation into the controversial $100,000 cash drop by the Safety Warehouse. Last weekend's event was marketed as New Zealand's largest mass cash drop, and that actual money would fall from the sky. But tempers flared as attendees in central Auckland found they were picking up mainly vouchers resembling $5 notes. The Commission says it's received 9 complaints about the cash drop, including 2 complaints referred to it by the police. It will investigate whether any advertisements about the event breached the Fair Trading Act, which prohibits misleading and deceptive conduct. Otago University is awaiting further advice from the police before making any decisions about rescheduling today's disrupted graduation ceremonies. The university postponed 2 ceremonies at last minute after a threat was made electronically this week. Further ceremonies are planned for Saturday and next week, while Otago Polytechnic's ceremony is scheduled for Friday. The university's Vice-Chancellor, Professor Harleen Hayne, says they'll take their lead from the police.
Right now, the university is waiting to make sure that we can hold ceremonies in a safe manner, and as soon as we can, we will be in touch with graduates who are here about what might be possible for you.
Professor Harleen Hayne. Victims of the Whakaari eruption have paid tribute to their tour guides and credited them for their survival. Videos sent in by some of the victims and their families were played at the commemorative service in Whakatane to mark 1 year since the tragedy. Nick and Marion London from Sydney say it's been a long and bumpy road, but are incredibly grateful to those who have helped them over the past year.
To our tour guides on the day, Kelsey and Jake, your quick thinking and your decisiveness gave us a chance for survival.
To the crew and passengers of the Phoenix, which rescued us from the island, and in particular to the young man who sheltered us from the sun with his bare torso.
Nick and Marion London speaking from Sydney. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says it's too early to say whether a formal apology will be made to the victims' families. Another Comanchero's motorcycle gang associate has been jailed after a failed $1 million drug deal. A major raid on the gang in April last year netted nearly $4 million in houses and fancy cars and a host of criminal charges. Before the court today was Connor Clausen, who tried to trade a suitcase containing $1 million of cash for a large amount of pseudoephedrine in 2018. The deal fell over, but Clausen was being watched, as the sentencing judge, Justice Lang, outlined.
By this stage, the police had been able to obtain a warrant permitting them to install a listening device. They also had mobile surveillance installed so that they could follow the van as it drove around.
Justice Lang sentenced Connor Clausen to 3 years and 8 months in jail. Maths and science teaching specialists are calling for change after a fall in New Zealand children's scores in an international test. 13-year-olds recorded their lowest ever scores in the Trends in International Mathematics and Science study, and 9-year-olds' scores also fell slightly. Their results are lower than those of children in most other developed nations. Chris Duggan from the Science Education Centre House of Science says New Zealand needs to do better.
We are seeing a trend, and I think it's a worrying trend, where over many years now, New Zealand is getting further behind other OECD countries in maths and science achievement for these age groups, and I think something needs to change, because if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting the same results.
Chris Duggan says schools often prioritise reading and maths, and science has been a poor cousin for too long. It's 6:05. The West Indies are singing the praises of the Black Caps ahead of the second cricket test starting in Wellington on Friday. New Zealand completely outplayed the visitors in the opening test with an innings victory, although the Windies are trying not to dwell on what went wrong in Hamilton ahead of the second test. Assistant coach Roddy Eastwick says the Black Caps are impressive both on and off the field.
Anybody that comes to New Zealand, you know you're in for a very, very tough series and a very, very tough game, because they've got the game where they want it, and they're unit. You can see it off the field, you can see it on the field. They're well led, but they also have a lot of leaders within that group. So that takes some pressure off Kane as well.
Meanwhile, the Victorian Government will consider increasing the Melbourne Cricket Ground's capacity for the Boxing Day test after the state reached 40 days without a new COVID-19 case. The venue's COVID-safe level currently sits at 25,000 of its 100,000 capacity, but MCG officials hope the level will be increased to 50,000. 13 Barbarians rugby players, including New Zealander Sean Maitland, have received bans for breaching COVID-19 protocols, which led to the cancellation of a game against England in October. The breach arose when players left their hotel rooms and had dinner in a restaurant without the permission of organisers. The New Zealand basketball star Stephen Adams is up 5 spots to number 70 in ESPN's annual ranking of the NBA's top 100 players. That's the news.
Tonight on Night, Simon Morris reviews the latest Keira Knightley flick, in which Women's Lib meets the anti-racism movement at a beauty pageant. Our Window on the World asks if a COVID vaccine is the pathway to normality, or has that train left the station? And our mathematician Dylan Mayhew chats about the classification of finite simple groups. Sounds simple enough, but the proof runs to thousands of pages. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland to Waitomo, also Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Scattered showers turning to rain tonight, some heavy falls, easing to showers tomorrow morning, then clearing by tomorrow night. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud at times, periods of rain tomorrow morning. Taranaki, Whanganui, Taihape, Manawatu and Wairarapa, periods of rain with some heavy and thundery falls tomorrow morning, then clearing. Horowhenua to Wellington, Nelson, Bulla and Marlborough, rain or drizzle at times, clearing from tomorrow morning. Kaikoura Coast mostly dry. Westland, fine today, showers developing tomorrow. Fiordland, showers turning to rain tomorrow evening with some heavy falls. Canterbury, Otago and Southland mainly fine, but showers for Stewart Island tonight. Isolated showers developing in Southland and eastern Otago tomorrow, then rain in Southland tomorrow night. Chatham Islands, low cloud or fog at times, periods of rain tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The opposition wants the Speaker to be upfront about how much taxpayer money was spent defending a defamation claim. Yesterday, Trevor Mallard apologised for comments he made last year, claiming a rapist was working on the premises. In a statement, he said it was incorrect of him to give the impression that the worker had been accused of rape and apologised for the distress and humiliation caused. But National and ACT say the timing is deeply cynical and Parliament and the public deserve an explanation. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
These were the words that sent a chill across the parliamentary precinct.
We're talking about serious sexual assault. Well, that, for me, that's rape.
So people have been raped in Parliament?
That is the impression I get from the report, yes.
But in a written statement yesterday, Trevor Mallard accepted his definition of rape was incorrect and said he'd made a personal apology to the individual. Shadow Leader of the House, Chris Bishop, says Mr Mallard needs to do more than issue a statement.
We're not calling for him to resign, but we are calling for him to be upfront and transparent about how much money has been spent. And I also think a statement to Parliament would be appropriate as well.
Mr Bishop says the timing is deeply cynical.
On the day of the Royal Commission into the mosque shootings and the day before a special motion in the House on Whakaari, White Island, right at the tail end of the parliamentary year.
Mr Bishop raised the issue in the House. Mr Mallard defended the timing.
The matter was agreed on Thursday or Friday last week and I released it as soon as was practical.
But he wasn't having a bar of any further discussion.
If it's to do with the last matter, I'm not going to hear any further on it.
ACT leader David Seymour used his adjournment speech to take aim at the Speaker.
The choices you've made over the last 24 hours have diminished that character further than even I could have imagined. And the simple answer is if you feel unable to explain those events to the House, then maybe you should not take the position, or maybe your colleagues on the other side of the House should take it from you. But so much for you. Merry Christmas, New Zealand.
The member's time has expired in more ways than one.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is refusing to take a view.
The Speaker is Parliament's person, so ultimately these decisions are for him, not for political parties.
The Speaker says both parties consider this matter closed, and part of the deal is that he makes no further comment. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
Judith Collins has offered a brutal account of National's lead-up to polling day, labelling her campaign team inexperienced. She made the remarks as politicians gathered for a post-election debrief held by Victoria University today, where they reflected on what's felt like a never-ending year. Our political reporter Katie Scotcher was there.
National suffered a devastating election loss, and today Judith Collins didn't sugarcoat things, giving a raw and brutal assessment of the 2020 campaign.
The combination of events, mistakes and distractions meant we did not look like a credible alternative government. We did not look like a government in waiting.
Ms Collins became the leader of the opposition a few months before the election. Today she revealed some of her colleagues asked her to take on the job the night before Todd Muller's shock resignation was announced. Ms Collins admits she had serious reservations.
I wouldn't quite describe it as a poison chalice, but it was definitely not a golden ticket.
Her husband agreed she shouldn't take the job, but she slept on the decision.
By the morning, I had decided if ever there was a time I needed to step up, it was now. And I am an optimist, and I genuinely believed that the election was still winnable by us if things went our way, and if we could give New Zealanders a reason to change the government. And unfortunately, we didn't do that.
What followed was a tumultuous campaign marked with self-inflicted distractions and wounds. Ms Collins says she inherited an inexperienced campaign team forced together at short notice.
COVID-19 lockdowns and 2 leadership changes meant we were not as well organised or prepared for an election as we had been in the past. And there were also problems with our policy platform, issues with campaign management, themes, messaging and discipline, and of course, distractions and scandals of our own making.
ACT's campaign was a stark contrast to that of National. David Seymour won the most support for the party ever, bringing in 9 new MPs.
I think it's fair to say that it is a story of coming from the absolute depths of despair to moderate triumph. We've got to start somewhere.
Mr Seymour says at the start of the last parliamentary term, he was in one of the deepest and darkest places a person can go. He shared this message.
There's always a bright future, and it may be that in only 3 years' time you find yourself champagne in hand riding a speedboat into the Viaduct Harbour.
Green Party co-leader James Shaw reflected on one election surprise, Chloe Swarbrick becoming the first Green MP in 20 years to win an electorate seat.
So Jacinda rang me up on the Sunday after the election. It was our first phone call, and the first thing she said, "So, Auckland Central. Didn't see that coming." And I said, the only person who saw that coming was Chloe Swarbrick.
Jacinda Ardern's reflections largely focused on the tragedies that marked her first term as Prime Minister and COVID-19. She also reflected on Labour's campaign strategy. Her and her MPs travelled across the country, spending time in both red and blue electorates. Everyone except Chris Hipkins.
For much of the general election campaign, I felt a little bit like the designated survivor. I was stuck here in the beehive poring over the daily testing numbers and the case investigations while all my friends were out having fun around the rest of the country.
Mr Hipkins says 2020 will go down as one of the most challenging in New Zealand's history. Politicians are off home now for a summer break and possibly some more reflection. They'll be back at the start of next year, and if 2020 was challenging, who knows what 2021 will bring. Ātui te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher aho.
It's 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A prominent Wellington concert promoter says the capital is languishing behind other regions and needs a large multi-purpose arena for gigs. A report commissioned for the region's Economic Development Agency, Wellington NZ, looked at the buildings it manages, including the Michael Fowler Centre and TSB Arena, and the need to future-proof them. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
It might be the country's film capital, but Wellington falls short when it comes to entertainment. The report says while various venues service the entertainment industry well, some lack modern technology and equipment. Size is also a problem, as is the lack of bums on seats and a skew to an older audience. It puts the old Opera House and Shed 6 on the chopping block, saying they should be redeveloped, repurposed or sold. However, Wellington NZ Events and Experiences General Manager Warwick Dent believes with the right redevelopment and focus, all buildings could stay.
We believe that all the venues do have a really good future and a very valuable future for the city. And we see our venues as being key economic enablers. They create employment through multiple sectors.
Phil Sprays, a Wellington-based concert promoter and owner of Capital C Concerts. He's been in the sector decades and reckons the city needs to think big and get an arena.
We don't have any facilities in Wellington to cater for audiences of, say, 10 to 15,000 indoors and a multi-purpose venue which could hold anything from exhibitions to concerts to sporting events, and etc. That's where the huge gap is.
He thinks the capital is missing a blindingly obvious opportunity.
But when you come down to a comparison, you need venues that can compete with Spark Arena in Auckland and the new stadium in Christchurch, of course, will be covered, so that'll house a lot more of those artists. Dunedin's got a roof over its stadium, but Wellington effectively doesn't have an indoor venue big enough to cater for the whole lower end of the North Island.
Wellingtonians have a handful of smaller venues to visit and watch gigs. Concert goer Alex reckons it's a good city that deserves a big space.
It would be nice to try and have some places where we don't necessarily have to have the noise control on them and sort of actually have the bigger concerts and the bigger acts coming in to enjoy Wellington.
But Warwick Dent doesn't think it will happen.
In the current environment coming out of COVID, any investment that the city was looking to make into an indoor arena would have been dependent on private equity as well and an arrangement with commercial partners. And we don't believe in the current environment that's probably feasible in the medium term.
He says the report's in the hands of council officials and Wellington NZ will work with them on whether the recommendations will become a reality. For Checkpoint, called Jonathan Mitchell-Aho.
A nationwide strike in India has seen roads, railways and markets shut down in support of farmers protesting against agricultural laws. Thousands of farmers have gathered on the edge of the capital, Delhi, for nearly 2 weeks after the government opened up the sector to private players. Despite several rounds of talks, negotiations remain deadlocked. The BBC's Rajni Vaidyanathan reports.
For days, farmers have been protesting here at the Delhi-Singhu border, and thousands have gathered here. Now, today they're calling on the rest of India to join them in a national strike. But why exactly are farmers so angry?
Farmer will become helpless, right? The whole control of the farming will go into the big corporates' hands. Most of the people's livelihood in this country is based on the agriculture. That's why people are scared that if they will control this food market, where they will buy our crop at whatever price they want, and they will sell at whatever price they want.
The government says that these new farm laws will actually open up opportunities. But talk to people here protesting and they disagree. Now, one of their big concerns is overpricing. At the moment, farmers generally sell their crops via wholesale markets which are controlled by the government and where they're offered guaranteed prices, the MSP, the minimum support price. Now, with the markets opening up and farmers able to sell directly to big businesses, there's a concern that those guaranteed prices will in the long run end up going away, and so will the farmers' profits.
The corporates will come, they'll pay whatever they want to pay, not the thing the farmer wants to sell on.
How do you feel about the future for farming in India then?
Very scared. Not just for me, for those farmers under 10 acres, they'll die.
Well, the protesters have been here for nearly 2 weeks. And they've kind of set up a camp and a community here. They're giving out tea and biscuits here for the morning. And if you just come with me through the crowd at a safe distance, You can see here as well, they're giving out supplies, toothbrushes, toothpaste, soaps. So you're sleeping in the cold right
Yes,
now?
we are sleeping in the cold.
How are you finding the cold?
We have to bear this pain for the cause we are fighting.
Well, so far talks between the farmers and the government seem to have failed to reach any sort of agreement, and it looks like people here are going to be here for the long haul. They've set up community kitchen here, people here cleaning the dishes, and some people are staying on the back of their trucks, making them their temporary homes. Hello there, sir. Kaise ho?
We've made this our home. We'll fight for all our rights, whether it takes 4 years or more. We're here to stay.
And that was Rajni Vaidyanathan reporting there from India. The US Supreme Court has dealt President Trump another blow in his bid to overturn Joe Biden's election win. It's refused to allow Republicans in Pennsylvania to block certification of the results there. Many Trump supporters were pinning their hopes on the court. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting the Trump administration turned down the chance to secure more than 100 million doses of Pfizer's vaccine before it was proven highly successful. CNN's Caitlin Collins reports.
A White House summit meant to tell progress on coronavirus vaccines quickly went off the rails today as President Trump wrongly implied he may still be in office next year.
We're going to have to see who the next administration is because we won in those swing states.
Trump was asked why no members of President-elect Joe Biden's transition team were invited, given Biden will be inaugurated soon and his administration will take over the distribution.
Hopefully the next administration will be the Trump administration because you can't steal hundreds of thousands of votes. You can't have fraud and deception and all of the things that they did.
Despite a string of court losses and recounts that have affirmed Biden's win, Trump called on state legislatures to help him overturn the election results.
Let's see if they have the courage to do what everybody in this country knows is right.
The president didn't mention how the federal government is now facing new scrutiny for passing up a chance to lock in more doses of Pfizer's vaccine.
We're very hopeful that the FDA will authorize the Pfizer vaccine within days.
Federal officials turned down an opportunity to buy millions of more doses of the vaccine this summer before it was proven to be highly successful in clinical trials, which the head of Operation Warp Speed defended today.
No one reasonably would buy more from any one of those vaccines because we didn't know which one would work and which one may be better than the other.
But Moncef Slaoui said he couldn't explain the executive order Trump signed today that would prioritize vaccines for Americans, then distribute it to other countries.
It sounds like the problem is the opposite right now. Pfizer has made deals with other countries that are going to limit the supply here.
Frankly, I don't know. And frankly, I'm staying out of this, so I can't comment. I literally don't know.
Scott Gottlieb, the former FDA commissioner who is now on the board of Pfizer, said Pfizer's doses have been promised to other countries.
Some of it was promised to other countries after it was offered multiple times to the United States.
That report from CNN's Caitlin Collins. In Australia, the first coronavirus vaccine are expected to be given out in March. It's a cautious timeline, but with case numbers so low at the moment, many Australians are happy to wait. The ABC's Gavin Coote has more.
Despite the emergency approval of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine in the UK, Australia's timeline remains unchanged, with March the most likely time it will roll out. The Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg.
Our intention is to complete our regulatory approval processes by the end of January. We're in no rush because we've got to ensure that community safety comes first. But if we can complete that regulatory approval process by the end of January, we can look to a rollout by March. That has been our stated timetable.
This stop is Chinatown.
On Sydney's light rail network, there's a steady flow of commuters now who feel things have already returned to some form of normality.
For so long as there's no community transmission, then when there are outbreaks, everyone gets a bit more nervous again.
That's barrister Chloe, who's out for the day with her family and sees the vaccine as a vital, if not urgent, measure.
You know, life is pretty normal now, except for large concerts and overseas travel and things, so we're lucky with that, but it's not sustainable, so we will need the vaccine.
The federal government has locked in agreements for 4 potential vaccines, including the one developed by Pfizer-BioNTech. Fellow commuter Oscar agrees it's sensible Australia sticks to the current timeline for a vaccine, rather than bringing it forward.
It's obviously not as important in Australia as, say, the US or the UK. You know, we get worried about 1 or 2 community transmissions in a day, whereas the US is dealing with 200,000. Obviously, it'll be a great thing for Australia, but it's not as critical for us.
Does that also give us the opportunity to watch and see how that rollout goes and perhaps to learn lessons from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I understand it, the testing of these vaccines has been greatly accelerated. It may be beneficial to see how other countries do it, and I suppose also there are lots of different vaccines that are out there, and some might be more effective than others, and if we wait a bit longer, maybe we can choose the one that's most effective.
Alex shares that sense of pride about how well Australia has managed the virus, while keeping in mind that another outbreak could always be around the corner until there's a vaccine.
Getting back to some sense of normal would be good, but I guess it's a matter of whether everyone would be happy to get the jab.
It's getting rolled out in the UK at the moment. Do you think it should be fast-tracked here in Australia, or can we afford to wait until March or April sometime?
Perhaps we can wait because of the fact that it's summer here at the moment, and perhaps we should allocate some of the vaccines for other countries first, like developing countries.
And that report by the ABC's Gavin Coote. While in the UK, thousands of people were vaccinated on the first day of the country's mass vaccination program. The country's targeting over 80s first. Among them is 91-year-old Martin Kenyon, who's hoping to live a long life filled with hugs from his grandchildren. In an interview that's since gone viral, he told CNN's Cyril Vayner how he ended up being one of the first in the queue.
I rang up Guy's Hospital, which I know very well, so I've lived in London most of my grown-up life, and I said, "What's this thing, you're doing the vaccination?" They said, "Yes." And then they spent various times asking me questions about this and that, not very interesting, and I said, yes, no, and they said, "We'll come at 12:30. Of course, I couldn't damn well find anywhere to park my car, so I was late. Anyway, I'm here now, and I got inside and they duly put me on a list. I went off and had a rather nasty lunch and then came back, and they were ready for me. And no, it didn't hurt at all. I didn't know the needle had gone in until it had come out. It was very interesting. No, it was painless.
How do you feel that you are now one of the first people in the country to have received the first dose of this vaccine?
Well, I don't think I feel about it at all, except that I hope I aren't not going to have the bloody bug now. I don't intend to have it because I've got granddaughters and I want to live a long time to enjoy their lives.
Have you been able to see them much this past year?
No, I'm not hug them. I'm going to for Christmas. And they're going to be their parents, my daughter and son-in-law, are going to make quite sure they're able to be hugged.
Have you told them? Do they know?
That I've been? No, I'm telling them, going to go home and tell them now. Nobody knows. You're the first to know.
I understand the hospital gave you a card?
Yes. Just says my name and when I'm to come for the follow-up in 10 days' time or so. Very unexciting.
So you should be coming back in 21 days' time, and according to NHS guidance, 7 to 10 days after that, which brings us to early January, you should have developed protection, immunity from the coronavirus, and that, sir, is when you should be able to hug your family and your...
Absolutely. That's my intention. Yes, I don't intend to have it. Well, there's no point in dying now when I haven't lived this long, is there? I don't plan to anyway.
91-year-old Martin Kenyon there, looking forward to some hugs after being vaccinated. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Crown has called the murder of an Australian tourist near Raglan last year an execution-style killing at a sentencing hearing that saw the killer, Mark Garson, jailed for more than 15 years. The police's review into its handling of the March 15th terror attacks has praised its response, but says staff were swamped by inquiries from family members of those killed and injured. The Commerce Commission is investigating the controversial $100,000 cash drop by the safety warehouse last weekend. Victims of the Whakaari eruption have paid tribute to their tour guides and credit